I have a great episode for you today. We are going to hear from a wind turbine inspector who saw something that he couldn't believe from far above. Then a hiker from the Rockies gets lost from his group during their expedition, and they have a run-in with some very large predators. I also have a few more accounts for you, but before we get into the stories, if you like strange and weird encounters, then hit that subscribe button because I release 4 to 6 times a week. Also, at the end of this video is a preview of the latest release on Donovan Dread True Crime. And this one is just absolutely brutal. It's about Guy Hines Jr., who is now considered a mass murderer after he attacked and killed 7 members of his own family. Now let's get into the stories. Hi Donovan, let me first start off by saying I really enjoy the show. And thanks for posting content on a regular basis. I became fascinated with cryptids after my 2018 encounter. Well, I should say a sighting rather than an encounter. This took place when I was on-site working for one of our clients. I'm a safety consultant, and one of my clients is a power company that has about 30 wind turbines in western Pennsylvania. I was doing a safety inspection on the FAA lighting on top of the wind turbine. We go up at least once a quarter to do routine inspections. The first few times I had to do these inspections were a little freaky because sometimes I have to crawl through this 18-inch hatch on the nose of the turbine. Now getting up one of these wind turbines is quite the task, unless you're going up one with an elevator. Most of them have sections of ladders where you have to climb up 300 feet to the top. The first time I climbed, my arms were just dead. We do have some people who can climb in 4 minutes, and I've even seen one guy take 6 hours to get to the top and 3 hours to get down. However, he was pushing about 400 pounds. Anyway, so I'm up there doing an inspection with another employee at our safety firm. We always go up in pairs to make sure we're tied off properly, and most tasks just require 2 people. We're looking around for a bit, just taking in the view before we begin our inspection, because it took us 35 minutes to get to the top. It's a gorgeous view from the top. It's like being on top of a building and looking out over a city. However, the turbine is in the middle of a field and is surrounded by woods on all sides. There are trees everywhere, as well as brush and grass. We were 300 feet up in the air, so you can imagine the view was breathtaking. Everything, of course, looks a lot smaller from up there, but my coworker also brought a small set of binoculars with him. When I looked over to the east, I saw what appeared to be this really large animal in a clearing just outside of the woods. It's hard to tell, but it looked like it was laying down. I couldn't make out any other details other than the fact that it was very large. It looked like this brownish gray color, and it just blended in with the grass and brush around it. I asked my coworker if I could use his binoculars, and he handed them to me. I tried looking for a few minutes, but it just blended in with the landscape. Then I saw it stand up. It was standing up and walking on 2 legs. It looked like a very large bear with an ape-like face, almost human, and really broad shoulders. It was walking around picking berries and eating them. I'm standing there watching this creature. Then I say, holy hell, I think that is a Sasquatch. My coworker immediately grabs the binoculars from me and says, give those to me. Let me see what you're looking at. The next words out of his mouth were, holy crap, dude, you're right. What is it doing here? I said, I have no idea. We were up there for another 20 minutes looking at this thing before we finally had to get our safety inspections done. When we finished our inspections, we looked again, but it must have left because we couldn't find it anywhere. After we climbed down, we talked with one of the workers at the power company about what we saw, and he said, oh, you saw Harry too? I was like, what? Harry? He said, yeah, we call him Harry. We see him quite often when we do maintenance up there. There's about 6 of us who tried to go out and locate him on the ground several times, but we never find him. He's got to be super aware of his surroundings because he is never seen on the ground. I got to be part of a hiking expedition that occurred out in the Rockies. and in a very swift moment I had been turned around and separated from the other hikers. This is a hiker's worst nightmare. I was very inexperienced at the time. I found myself in a landscape that was not consistent with what I knew about the Rocky Mountains. The ground turned coarse and full of rubble. Plants seemed practically non-existent, and a thick mist was rising, cutting me off from getting my bearings. Worse yet, I couldn't hear the group at all. Several times I tried screaming at the top of my lungs, just to see if I could get anybody to answer me. There was nothing. Nothing but the faintest sound around me. In fact, sometimes it seemed like nature itself was silent, shushing me to stay silent with it. The first sign that things were not right was the article of clothing I found. I came across a pink denim cap of one of the people that had been hiking in my group. I didn't remember the girl's name, but I distinctively remember that faded pink cap for some reason. I am one of those people that can remember far more details than I can a person's name. But that's just how it is. I picked that up with the intention of eventually returning it to her. I dared to take the sight of the hat as a sign of hope. Perhaps I was near them after all. But how could she have dropped the hat and not realized? It didn't really make sense. The hope was short-lived when I came across a backpack that had also belonged to someone in my group, but I couldn't place who it was. I continued through the thickening fog with the distinct feeling that I was going in circles. My rations and supplies were very limited. If this continued, I would have no choice but to perish out here all alone. I came across another possession of one of my track mates. This time there was a new level of bad news. It was a bandana that I remember seeing on one of the guys with spiked hair. It was stained with something dark and red, and I knew what that was. I just didn't want to admit it. I couldn't fathom my brain going there. It was at that point that I began to feel panic stalking me from a distance. My first thought was that robbers had come upon my group. Or maybe not robbers, but modern-day bandits. I don't know. Something had clearly happened to them. I hadn't heard any noise that would suggest a big bear or big cat attack. No screaming, no crying, nothing. I even looked in the dirt. There didn't seem to be any signs of a struggle. It's as if their clothing had just fallen. So I quickened my pace, with the visibility reducing by the minute. And the things I could see were things that I didn't want to. I came across a pair of shattered glasses that were all too similar to the pair worn by the Asian girl in my group. Then there was the torn sports bra that was also blood-stained. One article after another that I could recognize as being from my group emerged out of the fog as I pressed onward, and my own sanity was beginning to teeter, so I broke into a light jog. Even though the ground and the visibility was treacherous, the path began to lower with the unusual rocky ground rising on either side of me. Then, just like that, the trail went into a small cave. Small enough that if I wanted to get inside, I would have had to stoop down. Something inside me wanted to turn and run, but my curiosity overrode my primal caution. So I struck up my lighter and reached into the cave. What came next, I remember only in parts, because my mind evidently was closer to breaking than I had realized at that time. The halo of the flame showed nothing but rock at first, but then a pair of eyes had turned to me from somewhere at the edge of the light's influence, and then another, and more. Then the light showed me towering, furry bodies that were hunched at the back as if they were all used to a life of crouching and hiding. I hate to tell you this part because it's going to sound like I'm crazy, but I can only tell you exactly what they resembled. And what they resembled were werewolves. That's the worst word to use with the complete overexposure that this thing has gotten. But honestly, there's no other word to describe what animal I saw. Their teeth extended well past their lips. And I can tell you that they had long ears that looked like horns almost. Their mouths were busy chewing and gnashing something. I could hear the sounds of ripping and tearing. It was meat. They were eating on something that I couldn't see. I immediately worked my way out, and they didn't give chase. I'll never know why. Maybe there's a reason they didn't get to me. I'll never know. After climbing my way out, luckily I eventually found a trail, even though I was completely and utterly traumatized. I ended up contacting the authorities, and they did a very thorough investigation and did a search of the area, but didn't uncover anything, which is surprising. I told them about the bloody clothes and all the belongings they had left behind, that they were attacked by large unknown predators. They didn't really seem to take my story seriously. In fact, I was even a suspect in a potential murder since they disappeared, but nothing they found was conclusive. I even told them there was a cave where these beasts lived in. I understand this story is sounding more and more crazy as I go on, but this is my experience that I have to live with, forever, for the rest of my life. I don't get to just shut it off. And then, of course, after all of that, I have the trauma of dealing with being a potential suspect in their disappearance, which didn't result in anything because, like I said, they couldn't find anything conclusive that led to me. Anyway, they're all gone now. This was almost 9 years ago, and I still have to live with that pain. And I've only told a handful of people, in hopes that somebody can give me reassurance that things will be okay and that I'll be able to get through this. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me about 10 years ago when we first moved into our house. We live in the countryside in a small, remote neighborhood. I have a job in the city, so it takes about an hour to commute to work, but I never minded it. I liked the idea of having some privacy to think and play any music I wanted. I also wanted my kids to grow up around clean, fresh air, so the drive was worth it. I typically would leave work late at night when it was already getting dark. I'm a realtor, so usually after a day of showing houses, I have some paperwork to finish. Sometimes this means that I'm not heading home until 9 or 10 at night. The road I take to get home is really rural. It has no streetlights and it's surrounded by forest on both sides. I always had to rely on my headlights to help guide me. One night, I was on my way home when off in the distance I could make out a group of elk running across the street. They were plentiful in this part of Pennsylvania, and not unusual to see them in the woods. But this time, as I got closer to the spot where the elk had passed, something huge ran in front of my car. So fast that I barely got a look at it. It looked like it might have been a bear, but moved faster than any bear that I've seen. The movement made me jump in my seat, turning my steering wheel and swerving the car into the ditch in the side of the road. My head jolted forward on impact and hit the steering wheel. The windshield had cracked from the impact, and I lifted my hand to check out my head and felt blood running down the side of my face. But I felt I was okay for the most part. I lifted my head to look in the rearview mirror to check out my face, and that's when I saw it, standing behind the car in the middle of the road. The body was sort of like a man, but it was covered in hair. This dark brown hair, but it had the face of an ape. It was huge, and with me being down in the ditch, it loomed over the car in the moonlight. The creature took a few steps towards the car, then stopped as if it heard something in the woods. It lifted its head and sniffed the air, and then it took off in the direction of the elk. I got out of my car and looked around. I wasn't sure what I had seen. This thing was very muscular, and it didn't make a sound until I heard the screams, followed by a powerful yelping noise. On this section of the road, I didn't have any signal on my cell phone. I wasn't exactly sure how to explain what I had just seen when I got home. The ditch was deep and muddy, which made it difficult for the tires to pull out. After trying for a bit, I got out of the car and realized it just wasn't happening. I had just dug myself deeper in the mud trying to get out. I waited around for a while to see if a car might drive by. But when none came, I decided to walk home, thinking that in the morning I would call a tow truck. I was only about 5 miles from home, which in the car might be around 10 minutes, but I still had an hour of walking at least. While I was grabbing some stuff from the car, I looked behind me in the direction the animals ran. It's not like I was going to follow them, but for a brief moment, it looked like something was staring at me from the brush. I took a deep breath and focused on making my way home, praying that a car might come along this backcountry road to give me a ride back. Thankfully, I'd brought a flashlight with me, so I was able to use that. I hadn't gotten far when I heard rustling and saw movement in the bushes along the side of the road. I shined my light in that direction, but the movement stopped. Now I started to get spooked and sped up my pace. It wasn't long until I started to hear the bushes move again. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a scream. But before I could look and turn in that direction, an elk ran past, within inches of me, almost knocking me to the ground. I started to run as fast as I could. I heard this yelping sound behind me, and at the same time I saw headlights approaching. I flagged down the oncoming car to ask the driver if I could get a ride in the direction of my house. The man, who looked to be in his 60s, said that it wouldn't be a problem. He said that he was headed in that direction anyway, and then he asked me what I was doing out here this late at night. I explained to him what had happened, that I swerved to avoid hitting an animal with my car and I ended up in the ditch. He seemed interested and started asking me questions about the animal. I was hesitant at first, but then I decided to explain exactly what I saw. A big, hairy, ape-like animal standing upright that let out this high-pitched scream that sounded like a human. The man listened quietly. I thought for sure he thought I was drunk or something. I eventually got dropped off at my house and was able to pick up my car the next day. When they towed my car, they said the front driver's side window was completely smashed in, and the entire car smelled horrible. Guy Hines Jr. took the nation by storm when it came out that he had killed his father and 7 members of his extended family in a mobile home that they collectively shared. In October of 2013, Hines was found guilty on 8 counts of malice murder. In the state of Georgia, malice murder is considered a felony offense and is described as a homicide that is done with the express or implied desire to do evil. Hines was only 26 when he was sentenced for the killings that took place 4 years earlier in 2009. In recent years, Guy Hines Jr. has made headlines with his attempts to request a new trial and appeal his conviction.